Hi, everybody. This is the last official recap of this fall's TTRPG class. It's the third of these classes that I've done over the last 3 years, in addition to teaching games and lots of other classes. And every time I teach that class, we spend the last day doing two things, one of which I'll do for the benefit of my students who weren't in class, because, of course, these are official class recaps. We will be getting together during our designated exam time, which is 1:30 next Friday, to uh, share our on-essay projects. Some students will be doing presentations, other students will be showing off things that they've made or designed or written, and we're going to get together for one final culminating activity. And so, one of the things that I do and did today in class is make it clear kind of any final questions that students have about that activity, um, so that on essays are literally what they sound like. They're not essays. They don't necessarily even have to have a written element to the essential project. And indeed, in this class, they don't have to be complete. There's lots of other classes where the work of the class is to build and scope so that you create and learn how to make a very specific kind of thing. In this class, in the spirit of play, sometimes we bite off more than we can chew, and we make proof of concept or pilots. We try things that are too big for the class to hold. And so the important other part of the unessay submission isn't just the thing that you made or got somewhere along the path of making, but also what we call a metacognitive reflection. And that's a thinking about thinking. And so that's actually what we in the professoriate call the accessible object, the thing I'm actually grading. What I want to know is, how did the student tie this thing that they made or this process of labor and thinking to the gameplay and reading and watching and talking and more play and more talking and more writing and more thinking that they've been doing across the entire semester? It's 1,000 words. For those of you that don't know, that's 4 pages of Times New Roman double spaced 12-point font. And so it's not huge, but the goal is, we've got students who've had to do a lot of catching up. Um, we are still in the middle of a global pandemic where people get sick, and also other things kind of happen. And so there's the possibility for students to catch back up, to explore games that they might have missed in terms of actual in class play, all those sorts of things. And what the kind of metacognitive reflection allows students to do is show that even in the times that they weren't physically with us, they were able to stay with us in terms of kind of having an experience of the different concepts and play styles and ideas that we've been exploring. That's really what these recaps are officially for, although their audience has gotten a little bit bigger. The other thing that we spent most of class doing is the final stars and wishes for the class, the final reflection on this version of the class in comparison to 2021's version, the last time it was under this particular course number, or 2022's version, where it was an honors research seminar. The first time it was much more capacious in terms of games, and that version of the class had us playing Disco Elysium in class together and other kinds of things. We explored twine a whole lot more. And the second version of the class focused very laser tightly on actual play. Our gameplay was in service of understanding the performance style known as actual play, because honors research seminars are designed to give students course credit for very specific research labor that they do alongside me. And this time we came back to the course number for technology literacy and culture that we'd started out with, but I focused on analog games. And it turns out that that's exactly what we need at this point in the kind of life cycle of where games are in the larger culture. One of the things that was really fascinating to me over the last several weeks has been the recurrence of student expressions about the materiality of what we were doing. We had a huge PDF library, and thank you so much to the many publishers that have either the possibility for buying PDFs or low cost PDFs or PDFs that are bundled with physical books, because it's allowed me to kind of swell my lending library in a lot of different kinds of ways. But I ended up buying a huge number of physical text that I'd previously only had the PDF for because students wanted to have the encounter with the physical object. Journaling games and keepsake games were bigger than ever. And also, there was a desire for encounters with stuff. And I think that is something that, especially over the last 3 years, has become really important as we've kind of not made a digital turn to meet students where they are, but instead had to use even more digital tools and readings and things like that, and have more classes online and all that sort of thing, where screen time is no longer, 10 years ago, my students were like, screens are where I play, and books, like tangible books, are where I study. Now it's all in the kind of digital space for many, many students, and there's not as much of an encounter with materiality. And so, my previous classes in book history and bookmaking and thinking about the physical shape of books, it's also natural that the analog games are doing that work too. So, when I suggested, is next time a Baldur's Gate, Disco Elysium computer role playing game, students pushed back and said that that wasn't necessary, that that wasn't something that they thought was within the scope of this class, and it wasn't something that they missed or thought was important. They really wanted the shape of the human in this class and felt like they got it. Originally, today was supposed to be, let's rewrite the syllabus. Let's throw stuff out and shove stuff in and move things around. And what's really, really gratifying about the final shape of this class, which, to be fair, students helped create along the way through their stars and wishes, through other discussions. Basically, the first third of the class is always planned, the second third is always structured according to student desires. And the last third is designed to be often a free space, but we kind of kept that collaborative energy going in terms of students having interests and me rising to meet them. And that's in no small part because of all of the wonderful guests that we had, and students really appreciated those. One of my students said, "I know you've never had the same guest twice, but if you do, I really hope that Maggie Baker gets to come back and talk again." And I hope that too. Um, all of our guests were incredibly wonderful. And I think in my own reflection, there's definitely some folks that I wish I could either move around or put closer together, or even maybe even bring together in future versions of the class. For example, Taylor Moore was here on Tuesday, and oh my gosh, the kind of um, compressed history of kind of video and podcast and the media ecology and the way that ties into the training that came out of Upright Citizens and all of these kinds of things was such a beautiful microcosm that I almost felt like it was a shame we didn't have it earlier in our back pocket. And I know there were students who latched on to different things. It was also a really beautiful capper. I think it was a really lovely kind of 1-2 punch is not the word that I want, but it was a really wonderful compliment to what Maggie was talking about. Just the class before Thanksgiving. So we left with Meg Baker and we come back to Taylor, and they're really both uh, articulating in different ways, but with a shared value system of how to have a life in the arts and how to make things that you're proud of. And while they have very different ideas about how you structure that in a ethical way in the worlds in which we live in, um, I think that it's really interesting to put them side by side. Um, all of the games that we played, students were really excited about. Well, one of the interesting things was at a couple of different points, this they didn't say this, but I remember them saying this. Yazeba's and our playthrough of the Golden Cobra LARP, the archive, both had students feeling a little unmoored from the kind of intuitive collective building through emergent play. I say a thing and now it's true. It's not something I read. It's not something in the book. It's not something we previously agreed upon, but it is the kind of yes and part that made me think that next time it'd be really useful prior to those kinds of game experiences that we have someone who not only is a trained improviser, as several of our guests were, but also that I used their presence to very specifically talk about improvisation. And in fact, if I had a dream, it would be to have someone who's got some um, like training in improvisation to talk about the kinds of exercises and ways of entering that mindset that can really help out when you're encountering those kinds of uh, performances of emergent play. And, the first name that I, mentioned in class was, of course, Brennan Lee Mulligan. Taylor had literally just left, so he was on my mind. But it's also true that I could yank in one of my colleagues who's had, improv experience, and I said their name, Dr. Sunny Stalter Pace, and my students lit up. They know her. They know how smart she is. They know how clever she is and well informed. And they didn't know she was a trained improviser, that she, knew something about improv games and things like that. And in some ways, that's almost I don't better is not the word that I want, but in some ways, there's a kind of access that comes from a familiar expert, even more so than, say, someone who is well known to them in performance, and not kind of at the human level. So, as I told my students, this is something that I'm going to be thinking about. It's something that I'm taking with me along the way, and that was the final thing that we did was indeed talk about what we were going to take with us in the kind of, inspired by the language that frames Alice is missing. What are you going to leave behind? What are you going to take with you? And what was really wonderful and moving was the ways in which the class seems to have worked as designed, which is to say that students with a lot of experience in games found themselves introduced to a world of tabletop role playing games that they weren't previously familiar with, even if they've been spending much of their life with D&D and Warhammer and Pathfinder, as one student said. But also that students who had never played a tabletop role playing game in their life found things that excited and moved them, and that made them want to play more. As I said to one student who, at the beginning of the semester, had articulated in their introduction that they had a really hard time kind of finding motivation and joy. Remember, our students now have really never had a normal semester of college, or if they did, it was the very beginning and then everything changed. And so I went to that student and I said, in the back of my mind, this whole semester, one of my goals has been the hope that one of the things that you can carry with you away from this is the kind of joy and access to pleasure that you just said you're going to take with you, which was really, really wonderful. It's really fun to talk pedagogically with students who are going to be teachers, and that was a lot of our conversation today. Things that people are going to take with them or are already sharing with their fellow student teachers, with their lead teachers, with people in other schools, which is super cool. And of course, that's what this is about. This video that you're watching right now. It's highly likely, if the past is any indication, that you're a teacher too, to which I say, welcome. I hope found something useful in these ramblings over the last little while. It was always moving when students would specifically talk about, something that a particular speaker said that put a light bulb on, or a moment in a game that did the same kind of thing. What we were doing today really was kind of priming the pump for the metacognitive reflections that they're going to do, in addition to giving them a space to talk and give feedback in a way that makes them feel seen and heard in ways that I don't think that official evaluations really do. I didn't need for it to become the like, Dr. Friedman, this class is great and we wouldn't change a whole lot. In fact, I found myself pushing them a lot to be like, okay, I remember a moment of friction, even if you don't remember that moment of friction, which was really quite interesting as a kind of experience. Another thing that marks the passing of time and the ways in which 2023 is different from every year that's comes before is Dungeons and Dragons. Now, Dungeons and Dragons was not verboten in this class, but we also didn't really spend a whole lot of time specifically addressing D&D. And I never really have in any of my classes so far, despite my dubious status as a D&D related content creator or whatever, I don't know. But previous classes, especially in 2021, said to me that they wish there had been more introduction to Dungeons and Dragons so that when they read scholarship in TTRPGs, they would feel like they understood it better. But turns out that basically the concepts and ideas and mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons have steeped into our culture sufficiently thanks to Stranger Things and the D&D movie and Baldur's Gate in particular, that students reported not, even those who had never played a TTRPG and only knew D&D secondhand or from the wider culture, felt like they had enough. They didn't want more D&D. They saw and pointed to the ways in which D&D was present in the class. You kind of can't help it. Again, most scholarship is still focused on D&D as a kind of lingua franca in lots of different kinds of ways. But they felt fine. Didn't feel like we needed a D&D day or an explainer or anything like that. And so, as I told them, that's new. That's a comparatively new innovation. Students even a year ago were still saying, maybe we need some more D&D. Um, and so that was really fascinating and a real surprise of today. And I think that I come away from this version of the class deeply grateful. This is a class that has not been easy for any of us who are in it. Again, it's important to remember that the last couple of years in particular and the larger trends of higher education are such that most of us are overworked and stressed out. Students here at Auburn can take a whole lot of credit hours. In fact, before class, I was showing students how I figure out the course workload of like videos and all the outside of class stuff. And Auburn University expects that for every credit hour, you'll be in class for 50 minutes, and outside of class, you will prepare for that class for 2 to 2.5 hours, which is always super surprising to students. The idea that there's an official policy that expects that, um, you know, your preparation for class will take you hours of your time, and that I could, in theory, reasonably expect about 7.5 hours of students' time. And of course, if you think about that in terms of multiplying out the number of credit hours that students actually take, all of a sudden you're wondering, how are you sleeping? How are you doing all of the other things you need to function, especially if you need to work in order to pay for college? This is a lot. And that's the kind of normal state of play, so to speak, in higher education, to say nothing of the realities of illness and family challenges and transitions. Lots of students transfer in to larger schools from community colleges and things like that. All of those kinds of adjustments, all the things that make us fragile humans in a very real kind of way. And what my colleagues in disability studies, in particular, as my students know, have taught me is to think about the ways in which we are embodied people. We are not brains on sticks, but an entire apparatus around us is asking us to maximize our time, to be efficient, to hit targets, to do the minimum required across the board, because to go deep and to go passionate, unless it serves some kind of tangible and very specific and immediate goal, isn't worth it. And this class runs counter to all of that while asking students to go deep, but also acknowledging where they are. And one of the things that's really challenging is, how do you balance that? How do you make something a humane class, but also a rich one? How do you have accountability and generosity? And one of the nice things about having a small class like this is the ability to try to do both. And even when you fail or you don't quite meet it, and all of us participating in this class dropped the ball at some point. Um, how do we can be generous to each other because we're known to each other. This is the reason why this is the class that fills my cup. And then I move on to a completely different challenge this spring. Hundreds of students who are largely taking the class, um, to fill a very specific requirement, who are not in the humanities and may not necessarily see the humanities as something worthy of going deep and getting excited. And so it's a very different challenge that I'm up to face. But thanks to these students, I've been lucky enough to feel renewed and feel optimistic and reminded that when we talk to students candidly and meet as humans, not ignoring the power differential, not, kind of being, fuzzy wuzzy, but being truly present to one another, wonderful things can happen and understanding can happen, and so at the end of talking about this, I pointed them back to the very first exercise they were asked to do. Where do you know from? Introduce yourself. Tell us together in a written form, however you wish to, however you feel comfortable, what it is that you know, what you want to know, the communities and places and people that you have learned from before you ever came to us, and how we might be the next step to wherever comes next. And I think we managed that. I think we managed to be a bridge to somewhere else. Like I said to my students, I can't say necessarily that this is a, a class that's going to, you know, get them to free, but I hope it didn't stand in the way. And I hope it helped them identify ways in which they can get free. Um, if nothing else, I want to stand in solidarity with my colleagues who do attend to that work, that liberatory work, much more directly, and that hopefully that they now are primed to see in the world around them other people who are trying to do that work, in addition to s- imagining other kinds of values, both in the structure of the way that this class is assessed, as well as how we spent our time together. That play can be serious without being sad or depressing, but that it allows us to meet each other in our humanity in all kinds of ways. And from the final student reflections in our conversation together, I believe we've achieved that. New pleasures, new ways of knowing, and new ways of being together have all been illuminated to many of these students. One student said that it was a little like going back to kindergarten. And I said, I don't know that that's what you want to put on my evaluation. But what they meant was really wonderful, which was m- every other class I've taken has I haven't felt like I've learned something new. I've been building on previous knowledge, and that's important, but it's never been revelatory. And here, I felt like I was learning in a new way and learning new things. And so it felt like I was going back to kindergarten and learning like a child does again. And now I'm somewhere in elementary school in terms of this particular field. And that was really lovely, especially from a future teacher. I think that's something that I think is really something that I'm gonna hold close to me. So I know there's one lovely human being who is watching this live, and if they have any questions, they can feel free to put them in chat, um, and I would gladly answer them. I'll probably do a follow-up video just to talk about the unessays themselves at the end of next week, depending on how things shake out. And that'll be a weird time because it won't be Tuesday and Thursday anymore. Our final exam is on Friday. Um, but yeah, so thank you to my current live viewer, and thank you to anyone who's been watching these. These are like teaching itself, kind of messages in a bottle out to the future. And you don't know who's going to pick them up, and you don't know which parts are going to be resonant and that are going to be the things that somebody puts in their pocket and takes to share with someone else. And that's the beauty of all human communication, I guess, in a lot of ways. And what's really lovely is I had a student right after class kind of thank me for something that I'd done and want to reciprocate. And I want to note, especially in this particular format, that so many things that we do, especially teaching and activities like this, aren't reciprocal, aren't cyclical, aren't I do a thing and then I get something back. Instead, they're rivers. I come bearing the gifts and the thoughts and the learning that I have been privileged to experience, both from my students and from my colleagues and from so many generous people who stand and speak in community with me. And these videos hopefully pass as much of it along as I possibly can. We're looking to do it a little bit more beautifully and uh, post productionally in the future. And in the hopes that, whoever watches this, whoever gets to the end, uh, can take it and in turn share it with others. And I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you all very much. It has been a wonderful semester. And I don't actually know, thanks, Maverick, too. And I don't actually know when this class will be offered again. I spent yesterday filing the last of several grant proposals. All the way from the federal level down to the local institutional level. And one of the paradoxes of uh, tabletop, or one of the paradoxes of academia, is um, the reward is to not be in the classroom. And it's a mixed blessing. I do want the time to write and to travel and to talk to people and to do the research that came out of this class and that comes back to this class. And so if any of those land, then I may not be teaching this class next year. Instead, I'll be teaching tabletop in different kinds of ways and sharing this kind of content in different formats. This channel will, of course, not go on hiatus in any real way. We've got lots of other things up our sleeves. But yeah, it's interesting to think about the possibility that this is the last TTRPG class for a little while at least, certainly until next fall. I will probably stop in for a few accounts of my attempts to bring games into my large literature class, trying to get uh, students who are not in the humanities and not in the class willingly to play games. So far, it looks like most students are very excited about that possibility. I send out a survey prior to class. So stay tuned. But thank you all very much, and I will see you around. Bye.